Cincinnati Bengals, your hometown Cincinnati Bengals, Sam. They're over under per FanDuel, 9.5 for Cincinnati. Interesting offseason as they bring back or just re-sign Jamar Chase or extend Jamar Chase, bring back Tee Higgins as the 1-2 punch at wide receiver. The contract holdouts at edge rusher between Trey Hendrickson and then rookie Shamar Stewart. Shamar Stewart's at least signed.
We got one of them done.
And in camp. The issue with doing preview shows right now in late July, things can change between now and the season. So we're recording this in late July. If you're stumbling upon our Bengals preview in late August and Trey Hendrickson's been traded or something like that, that's, just be aware. But the big name players in Cincinnati have been the story. The defense is going to be the story because they were awful last year defensively. They were also a handful of plays. I know you could do this with a lot of teams. A handful of plays away from, instead of being 9-8, being 12-5.
Yeah.
A kick here and there, a play here and there. I still think this is a very good team and another potentially elite offense, despite some of their offensive line questions once again.
Yeah, I think those two things can coexist. Like, they disappointed last season, but they were very close to being a much better record football team than they looked, And if you watch that quarterback series on Netflix, like, that sort of brought you through some of the close losses that you forgot about, where they, like, the offense played out of its mind, hung 38 points or whatever, and they still managed to lose the game because the defense gave up so much, or a missed kick or whatever. They were close to being a lot better. And of course, it all ultimately hinged on the one game where the offense didn't really show up in week 1 against the Patriots. I mean, that was the one that really got away, where the Patriots are a bad football team. They were always supposed to be a bad football team, and it's the one game where the offense for the Bengals didn't really fire. And even then, they still had what should have been a touchdown, kind of dropped over the goal line, ended up being a turnover instead of a touchdown that would have been the difference. Ultimately, though, you got to the end of the season, the Bengals offense was cooking. People were making Joe Burrow MVP chants every time he walked anywhere. They were a legit threat if they had made the postseason. They are very close this offseason to putting together not the perfect offseason, but like the perfect offseason for them. They lock up their 2 wide receivers. Everyone assumed they were going to let go of one of them. I'm Tee Higgins. But everyone assumed they were probably going to let him go to keep the money in Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. They end up going, no, we're going to keep this group together. Burrow put pressure on them to do that. They have the contract disputes on defense. They get the Shamar Stewart thing done. He's in camp. He's going to have almost the entirety of it to try and get himself up to speed. And now the last domino to fall is, can they make things right with Trey Hendrickson? Can they get their best defensive player in the building and then try and go and work from there? They need him. That's a huge thing. One thing that helps us here is I think the 2 potential outcomes here are Hendrickson eventually gets signed and he's in the building and all's good, and this drags forever and he's still in limbo. I think those are the only 2 outcomes here.
Hendrickson was so good last year.
Yeah.
So good last year on a defense that, remember early in the year, I was looking up historical comps for games. Like, was this the worst pass rush game we've ever seen from a team after watching the Bengals try to put pressure on the quarterback? And they were in, bottom 3, bottom 5. They had so many games where they just got zero pressure. But they also, remember, they should have beaten the Chiefs in week 2.
Sure.
There was a 4th and long defensive pass interference. Trey Hendrickson almost single-handedly on the defense, key sacks to keep them in that game. And that happened throughout the year. He had this knack not only for pressure, but to also finish the play, to get the sack like a TJ Watt always does in Pittsburgh. And that was with no pass rush on the opposite side. Sam Hubbard, now retired, was the top edge rusher on the other side. He was getting zero pressure. He's retired now for a reason. So the 2 X factors for me for Cincinnati, or maybe 3, the 2 edge rushers, whoever's Trey Hendrickson, someone on the other side, and then Al Golden coming in as defensive coordinator. Yes. Because we've seen historically too, sometimes teams with the same exact talent just put in a new defensive coordinator, and defense is fickle, right? Just changing the scheme makes the defense a little bit better. I think the Bengals offense is going to be elite. Let's talk about them in a second. But defensively, the same way we talk about offensive lines, I think they're in creep back toward average territory. If they can do that, and it's Hendrickson getting back into camp, some kind of help on the other side, whether it's rookie Shamar Stewart, Miles Murphy taking a step in year 3, which is possible that he could be a reasonable pass rusher. He dealt with injuries early last season, never really got going. Joseph Asai looks like just a good rotational edge. That's really what he's been. But they need somebody to step up, or the conglomerate of those three to step up. But then Al Golden with the returning corners, DJ Turner coming off of injury, Dax Hill coming off of injury. That's the other part of this Bengals defense. They were hurt at corner just as DJ Turner in his second year last year, heading into year 3. Just as he was getting going, he gets hurt. Dax Hill just converted to corner. He gets hurt. They have the ingredients, I think, to get much better defensively.
Yeah, there's those two things I think are important. Number one, the defense shouldn't have been as bad as it was a year ago. The talent level was not that bad. This group had been playing at a really high level before that. I mean, Lou Anarumo is only a couple of years removed from being praised as one of the best, defensive minds in the game because of what he was getting out of that defensive group. Suddenly, it starts playing terribly, and it's like, it's time for Lou to get fired. Now, look, I agree. I think there is evidence to say sometimes, I don't know if it's the message gets stale or whatever it is, but simply change for the sake of change when things are not going well, particularly on defense, I think can have real value. So I would expect them to get better simply by changing coach. I would also expect them to get better if they just ran it back. Like if they'd kept Lou Anarumo and just gone again this year, I would expect them to be better because they shouldn't have been as bad as they were a year ago. And then the third element is, like, people forget the injuries they had in that secondary in particular. Like, those corners got banged up a lot, and so you're not dealing with what should have been the starting unit. Now, obviously that happens throughout the NFL, but like, just because every team deals with injuries doesn't mean you should weigh them all the same, right? Like, who gets injured, where, how, when. Like, these are all important variables in how a team plays. It doesn't mean that you can say, well, that's why this team is. It's like people sometimes have a tendency to say things like turnovers and injuries. Everybody gets them, so they all even out over a season, but they don't. Like, that's the thing. If you actually go through and calculate these kinds of things, they're massive variables and they're important. And it doesn't mean that you can say, well, therefore we can lean on this, and but it means you can say, well, if you run the season back again, would the results be the same? Well, no, because this variable would be dramatically different. And so I think in 3 separate areas, the Bengals defense should be better this year than it was a year ago if they get Trey Hendrickson back in the building. Now, the concern would be those 3 separate areas might be worth less than not having Trey Hendrickson. And that's where this is a massive problem for them. The other thing is, remember, and this came up in the Netflix show as well, more than any other team, I think the Bengals have this history of slow starts in the season. And so other teams might not really care if they've got a guy in training camp or if a guy misses some time or blah, blah, blah. Maybe more than any other team in the NFL, the Bengals want to have a good training camp, a good preseason, and hit the ground running in week 1 so that they're not spotting the rest of the NFL 1 or 2 wins to begin the season. Because last year, the win they spotted them in week 1 ended up being the win that kept them out of the playoffs.
That's just another component. Even when they were at their best, remember they did go to the Super Bowl in 2021 and the AFC Championship in 2022.
Yeah.
They always started slow.
Right.
And last year, I mean, if they start 0-2 again, we're going to show up in week 3 and just my analysis is going to be like, is this when Zach Taylor gets them to turn it around? And last year, it's like they just waited too long to turn it around. I don't know how you change that. I don't know how teams change the trends of, we have a history of having a very good team that starts slow. What do you change in training camp, in preseason, in workload? What do you change? Because Burrow, too, I mean, we came out of here after week 1 with that Patriots game.
Yeah.
And it was like either Gerard Mayo is a secret genius and the Patriots do have something here, or Cincinnati. Like, what was Cincinnati doing? Like, the whole offense looked nothing like what they were before in previous years or after for the rest of last season.
The problem is you remove your margin for error when you start slowly like that. And again, the Netflix thing, like every week, Burrow was being asked, like, is this a must-win, right? Are you in must-win territory already? And he's sort of working through and calculating, well, okay, now we've got 3 wins. We need to win like 11 games. Like, it's doable. But it gets harder, right? And the problem with the NFL is it's very, very difficult to get through an entire season without some random result where a crappy team plays out of its mind and beats you, right? Because everybody, relatively speaking, is good. Even the worst teams in the NFL are dangerous, and you can't overlook them. And on a random Thursday night, they can show up for their Super Bowl in week 8 and knock you over, right? And if you have spotted everybody a couple of games to begin the season, you've eliminated your margin for those games. You can't have a game like that in the middle of the season where you just don't show up and the opposition does, and now you lose. So that's Cincinnati's problem, is they keep giving the rest of the league 1 or 2 games like that to begin the season, and so they can't have a bad day randomly in a November weekend. The Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, like these teams can do that. They can just not show up once randomly in November and it doesn't matter. The Bengals keep passing up that gift.
So defensively, just to wrap on that side of the ball, they tried to add some big bodies up front. TJ Slayton comes over from the Packers. BJ Hill still there, second year of Chris Jenkins. They need to do a little bit better against the run. Absolutely need to rush the passer better. I don't know if they have the pieces unless Jenkins does what we thought he'd do coming out of Michigan as a second rounder last year.
He's another guy who missed time injured at the start of the year, had to jump on a moving train. That's always hard. Like Jenkins, again, if it doesn't happen this year, sure. But I think going into this year, it's fair to be optimistic that Chris Jenkins can be a much bigger disruptive force than he was last year.
Hey, guys, just taking a quick break to tell you, hey, just over 50% of you are still unsubscribed to Check the Mic. It helps the channel. It helps to make sure that you don't miss any of our shows. So if you have a chance, hit the subscribe button right now. So they need to rush the passer better. Al Golden comes in. He played a ton of man coverage last year at Notre Dame. They had the corners to do it, but that'll be interesting to see if they do that with Turner, with Dax Hill, Cam Taylor-Britt. I think they'll be better defensively with the ability to scheme up some pressure, play a little bit more aggressive on that side of the ball. Offensively, for the 20th straight year, the Bengals don't have a great offensive line. It's really, the Joe Burrow era. They have not been good from a pass protection standpoint, but like the Ravens offensive line, where if you said, hey, on paper, this isn't the best team, but they have a quarterback that allows it to happen, Burrow has still had a lot of success with the poor pass blocking offensive line. They still scored about 28 points per game last year. I don't know if they're going to be any better on the offensive line this year. I don't know how much it matters. I think where it's mattered the most, and again, when you talk about good offensive line, run game and pass game are two different things. They're not great in pass protection. They're also not really maulers up front. They struggled in short yardage last year. They struggled on the goal line and converting 3rd and 1s and 4th and goals. And that's why, remember how many times did Burrow just throw a deep ball on 4th and 1 last year? If they get better at the situational football aspect of it, that's where I think this offense can really be special. They were special last year, probably Burrow's best season, throw for throw, and what he was able to do, pocket movement, just getting the ball down the field and taking care of the ball, but also making big plays. But this offense can be special if they could just get a little bit better. I think it's some of the situational football that they were lacking in last year.
Yeah, you asked recently, who was the last quarterback that played so well in such a sustained fashion with that bad an offensive line in front of him.
Can I give you the rankings, by the way?
Sure.
Bengals, because I just tweeted it out. I had to make sure we had it. Bengals team pass blocking grade since 2020. 2020, 27th. Then they were 31st in their Super Bowl year. 29th in 2020.
31st.
Yeah, because this includes the playoff run where they got wrecked on that playoff run. Burrow got sacked 8 times against the Titans in the divisional round. 29th in 2022. 22nd was the best they've had in the Burrow era. 22nd in 2023, and he was hurt for some of that year. And then 29th last year, 2024. Those are the Bengals PFF team pass blocking grades. Go ahead.
The obvious name that people brought up was Andrew Luck.
Yeah.
During most of his career, frankly, with the Colts, he had a pretty awful offensive line in front of him. And I don't think he's played as well as Joe Burrow did in the face of that pressure, but definitely overperformed what you would have expected him to do.
Yeah, and there was elements of Luck's career where everybody would say, hey, you guys are failing him with this poor offensive line. Now, I think there was he was playing early career with Bruce Arians. They had a deep drop. They put a lot of pressure on the offensive line. That's that straight drop back type of offenses. That's why.
Yeah.
I don't think Cincinnati is necessarily putting extra stress on the offensive line. Maybe a little bit. They don't run as much play action. Burrow's in the gun a lot. Either way, Burrow to Chase and Higgins. Andre Yosivas was a really, really nice red zone weapon last year. Jermaine Burton is already getting some training camp hype. I think if they just get pretty good play from wide receiver 3, you might have some games, whether it's Burton down the field.
If you were a betting man do you think it's more likely that he is a solid wide receiver 3 for them this year, or not on the roster in week 1?
As a betting man, I would say off the roster.
Right.
But look, I don't think
just to set expectations for Jermaine is all I'm doing.
Part of the reason why I thought Burton, I mean, I loved Burton as a player. Part of the reason why I thought he was so important, it was because of the uncertainty around Tee Higgins, that he had the ability to step in as a wide receiver too. They don't need that necessarily, but if Burton is as special as I think he can be, and Josivac is just a good, dependable 3/4 receiver. Again, we've got best in the league pass game ability here in Cincinnati, including Mike Gesicki. They brought him back fairly cheap at tight end. So they have all the pass game weapons that they need. Chase Brown did a nice job last year as the feature back. Taj Brooks comes in as a late round running back. Maybe he helps some of that short yardage. I think the run game is the only piece that you want to round out this offense, especially short yardage.
I could see Taj Brooks having a real impact in this offense. I like his game quite a bit, and he's got this fun playing style of like, I tend to like running backs irrationally who are weird body shapes for the way they play. Remember TJ Duckett, who was built like Mike Allstott, but like had twinkle toes?
Loved TJ Duckett.
Right? There's just something funny
in
about
the early
those guys.
2000s.
There's something compelling about guys that play in a completely different style to their body shape. Like Jerome Bettis, right? The guy's nickname was literally the Bus, and yet what sort of defined him was, again, like little twinkle toes, like lighting his feet for a giant, heavy, moose of a player.
Like Garrett Blunt was kind of like a one-cut downhill runner, but
right. I mean, he made more of his power than I think some of these other guys. But I think there's something compelling and interesting about guys that play in a different style to their body shape.
All right, man. So again, I think offensive line-wise, what's happening here? Both guards were an issue last year. They're relying on third-round rookie Dylan Fairchild from Georgia, who I liked quite a bit, but you're like third-round guards don't always hit the ground running, so that's a challenge, but he has a chance to step in at left guard. The right guard, you have Lucas Patrick in there, Cody Ford battling for that starting spot, and then three starters back, but even then, Orlando Brown hasn't played as well in Cincinnati as he did in Kansas City or Baltimore earlier in his career, and Amarius Mims, inconsistent as well at right tackle. So I don't know that they're necessarily better up front from an O-line perspective, either pass blocking or run blocking. I don't think there's anything that says they're going to be better than last year, but I don't know how much it matters because I think Burrow's shown that he can handle the pressure. Like the fact that the Bengals offensive line consistently ranks in the 20s, and I know there's people in the analytics community that look at the sack rate and this and that. Burrow's not as good as Lamar and Mahomes and Allen. I think he is. I think he's very much in that elite bucket and has a chance to carry this offense, in part because he's got Higgins and Chase to throw to.
Yeah, I feel a little bit like the offensive line. I think the offensive line and the defense have some similarities from a year ago. Their offensive line has kind of approached things almost the way Buffalo did a few years ago, where they threw a lot of bodies at that offensive line. None of them looked particularly good. And it was almost like they were, sometimes when you target overly aggressively the creep back toward average philosophy that we preach, the risk with that is, what if all of your maybe average players hit a bad year together, and now your offensive line is just garbage because you got 5 guys whose baseline or peak is above average, and they all just had bad seasons together, and so now you just got a trash offensive line. I think the Bills did that for a few years before finding some very good players, and they've accelerated beyond that. The Bengals did that where they went hard to overhaul an offensive line but didn't spend much to do it. They brought in a bunch of mid to low level players in free agency fast. And I think last year those collectively all had a bad year. So part of me expects the average of the 5 to play better this year than they did a year ago just by running it back again. But there are a lot of question marks in that line, and some guys that you think, even if they played to their best, probably don't have a particularly high ceiling. The big X factor, though, on the line is Amarius Mims, who, low in playing experience throughout college and the NFL, has quite an extensive injury history for a guy that hasn't played that much. Like, they need him quite a lot, and he's quite risky.
All right, man, 9.5 is the over-under from our friends over at FanDuel. Last year I chose Bengals-Eagles as my Super Bowl prediction. So I was high on Cincinnati heading into last year, and I don't change my mind often, so I'll probably be high on them again, despite what happened last year.
But think how close you came to having your like the Bengals they were, one final thing away from making the playoffs, and they could have gone on their run. They could have been the team that got waxed by Philadelphia in the Super Bowl.
I like the over of 9.5. I think Bengals-Ravens battle it out for the division in the AFC North. And look, they lost the 2 losses that they had to the Ravens. Slim, right? We're talking kicks and bad snaps, and we're talking really close here. So I like the over for Cincinnati. Where are you going with it?
So this is the thing. I think the defense will be better than a year ago. I think the offensive line might be better than a year ago, and I think they probably get more of the razor-thin breaks go their way this year than happened a year ago. However, all of that could be balanced out if the offense doesn't play as well as it did a year ago. Like, what if Burrow doesn't play like an MVP? If he just has a slight downtick, and everyone's assuming, well, they're running it back. They brought back Higgins and Chase, and it's all going to be the same.
Yeah.
If that takes just a slight step backwards, it could completely wash out all of the other things that get better. So I do agree that I think I would go over that 9.5, but I would just have that note of caution that don't necessarily expect the offense to play exactly the same as it did a year ago. It might be a little bit worse just through variance. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.